Hello friends, my name is Leigh and I create videos about photography as an art and as a lifestyle. My art and lifestyle have changed quite a bit over the last couple of years, which ties into today's video, where I went on a solo camping trip to the south rim of the Grand Canyon with a camera system I've never used before, OM system. And this is how the trip started. I stopped to charge my car in Tucson, which is the town just outside of the southern entrance to the national park. It's always good to begin a camping trip in the rain, am I right? Anyway, luckily it stopped and then just rained on and off as I made my way from the southern entrance to the village and the visitor center, and then all of the way to Desert View Campground, which is where I was staying and is at the eastern end of the South Rim. I've been a photographer for a long time, and I have been sharing my photography on YouTube for nearly 15 years. In that time, I have been incredibly fortunate to try out different brands of photography equipment. While I started out as a Nikon user, I am now well versed in many brands. We have owned a number of brands, and one of my favorite things about my job is trying out new gear. So when OM System reached out to see if I wanted to try something out, I said, absolutely I do. I chose the OM-1 Mark II and a few lenses, the 12mm f2, the 12-40 f2.8, the 300mm f4, and the 1.4x teleconverter. Because the OM-1 Mark II has a 4/3 sensor, you can multiply those focal lengths by 2 to understand the full frame effective field of view. Basically, with all of the lenses, I had a range covered of 24mm to 80mm, and then I had 600mm, and with the teleconverter, even 840mm. The reason I was so excited about this system as a whole is because of one of those changes to my art and lifestyle in the last few years that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. I have become keenly interested in more compact, lighter weight gear. Out of necessity, I have ongoing back issues, and I am willing to make trade-offs to lighten my camera backpack. The OM-1 Mark II has a 4/3 type sensor, and while the body isn't especially compact among mirrorless bodies available today, the lenses, which were engineered for that 4/3 sensor, are where you really see the size and weight savings. So while this OM system kit did lighten my backpack, I wanted to know if I noticed any trade-offs as I used it over my few days at the canyon. I'll let you know as I go along on this journey. I didn't have any issues setting up the camera or even working with it in the rain, and the menu system is relatively simple. There was definitely some terminology that I needed to look up in the manual, but the menu system and controls being easy to use gives the camera bonus points. This first afternoon was really me getting used to using the camera in the field. Even though I had worked with it a bit for some product photography and videography prior to the trip, I still downloaded the camera manual to my phone because if something is going to stump me, it is certainly going to be out in the middle of nowhere with no mobile reception to look up answers. After I got settled at camp, I grabbed my Atlas Athlete pack with all of the OM system gear and a tripod, and I walked to the rim. I haven't been able to load up a backpack full of gear and hike even a mile with it in a long time. It was the savings in weight because of these more compact lenses that I was able to do this. If you've been following me for a long time, you will know how important that is. If not, you'll just have to trust me. It's a big deal. And that being said, if the cameras or the lenses had been challenging to set up or navigate the menus, if the files that were produced were less than stellar, the size and the weight wouldn't really make a difference. But you've been looking at the photos, they look great. In fact, take a look at this raw photograph of Desert View Watchtower. I chose my settings so the tower itself is pretty dark because I didn't want to end up losing all detail in the bright areas of the clouds. I did end up with some clipped highlights though, so in editing, I brought up the exposure in the foreground and the tower, and then there was an impressive capacity for highlight recovery in those areas of the clouds where the highlights were clipped. Speaking of the files themselves, if you are a photographer that likes to shoot in JPEG, or like me, you just prefer to do minimal editing on most of your photos, the files coming out of the camera are beautiful. They have a natural look, but I found that on most files, I didn't edit much. Raymond was staying in Flagstaff, but he drove out for this sunset. He brought his own gear, so you'll see that in another video soon. This was one of those times when the canyon looked like a painting. There are always ravens and vultures riding the winds here. This is when I was really able to exercise the autofocus capabilities of the camera. I was, again, pleasantly surprised by how quickly the camera would detect and lock on to a bird flying. This is what I would expect from cameras on the market today that are optimized for fast action. And this is where I found that speed and responsiveness is not a trade-off you experience with this compact super telephoto setup. Even when the birds were flying down in the canyon and they were quite far away, the camera would detect them and lock on quickly. There is a part of this that is technique. If I wasn't able to physically track them to keep them in the frame, the autofocus wouldn't matter. But with a little bit of practice, you will see more in-focus shots than not in situations like this with this camera. So Raymond and I enjoyed the evening until it got cut short by high winds and lots of rain. And I started fresh for sunrise in the morning. I went to Grand View Point and hiked down just a tiny bit with my pack of gear. Yes, I am wearing Crocs. No, I do not recommend wearing them to hike in the canyon. It was early and I was too lazy to head back to the car after I realized that I was wearing them when I got to the trailhead. It was still quite dark when I arrived, so I used a tripod to capture some photos with a slower shutter speed. I exercised the 12 to 40 millimeter f2.8 lens that I had with me to capture different compositions. It was, again, a beautiful time to be out there. There's never a bad time to be at the Grand Canyon, but without clouds, your photography can be lackluster, no matter the camera that you have. The harsh sun that is often present can make the canyon look washed out. I got super lucky with these summer monsoon clouds the entire time I was there, and I took full advantage. The diffused lighting they provide add dimension, and the rain soaked into the canyon walls produced glorious colors. You can see the Colorado River here in the distance. That is the same section of river that you saw in the photos from the previous evening. Oh, and fun fact, Grand View Trail is where Raymond and I got engaged many, many moons ago. Moving along that day, it did get pretty warm, so I hung out in the shade of my campsite, trying to take a few photos of birds, and then I ran a time-lapse of the clouds using the in-camera interval timer. This is a time that I referenced the camera manual to make sure that I understood each setting in this menu item so that I ended up with the photos that I wanted. Speaking of wildlife, it was a few hours later that I was driving along looking for a shady place to park that I came upon 2 bull elk near the side of the road. Quick public safety announcement here. When I came upon a traffic jam on Desert View Drive, a 2-lane road, and saw people gawking out their windows and stopping in the middle of the road, I patiently waited for the traffic jam to clear, pulled past the elk to where there was a safe pullout where I could fully pull my car off and park legally. And then I grabbed my camera and I walked back to where the elk were, keeping in mind that I needed to stay far, far away from these massive animals because they can get aggressive. Luckily, I had the 300 millimeter lens on the camera, so I stayed back even further than I felt was safe, for the simple fact that I wanted to capture the enormous set of antlers. With the 4/3 sensor and its 2x crop factor, you will find that a 300 millimeter lens on this system is the equivalent field of view of 600 millimeters on a full frame setup. I crept around in the woods, waited, photographed some more, and all told, I only had to spend about half an hour there to get my fill of these beauties. It is at these distances where we can truly appreciate the 300 millimeter prime lens. The detail that we can see in the elk's coat and the fuzzy antlers is mind-boggling to me. I also found that the autofocus did a fantastic job of focusing on the elk and not the branches surrounding the guy. I could have watched them all day, but I needed to get set up for sunset. While I was back at camp to eat some dinner and prepare for sunset, I heard from a park ranger that there was going to be a ranger talk about ravens at the Desert View Amphitheater. I love ravens, so of course I wanted to attend. Luckily, the amphitheater overlooks the canyon and I was able to set up my tripod and get my time lapse started right at the rim and then walk back a little bit and sit in the amphitheater and still see my camera. That way, if anyone got close, I could quickly get there and shoo them away. The presentation itself was amazing. I love learning from park rangers. They are so knowledgeable. And the sunset was phenomenal. Even after I stopped the interval timer, I couldn't help but continue to capture more photos using the tripod and slowing my shutter speed to account for the approaching darkness. I soaked up every last moment of light before heading back to my camp by the light of my headlamp. And that's all for this trip, and my time with the OM-1 Mark II. I absolutely enjoyed this camera. It was perfect for this trip, and I would gladly bring it to photograph wildlife and landscapes anywhere. I didn't talk much about video capabilities in this video, but you did see some clips captured with the camera throughout my trip. It certainly met my expectations there. This is a mature system. You have a wide range of lenses available. Of course, there are benefits and drawbacks to a 4/3 sensor. I won't go into them here, but I do discuss it in my Basics of Photography course, and I will link to that course in the description of this video. It's free. For those of you that would criticize a 4/3 sensor for not being a large full-frame sensor, I can say, having just used this OM-1 Mark II on a major photography outing where I did a variety of photography in multiple situations, I encourage you to shoot with one and see what the practical differences really are when you actually use the camera rather than theorizing how it may or may not affect your images. And now I want to hear from you. Do you use OM system? What does your kit look like? And do you think that I should try out more OM system gear? What do you want me to try? Thank you to OM System for loaning me this gear. It was absolutely an enlightening experience. And thank you for watching.